Tyler James, 19, of Greater Lumley, received two separate fixed penalty notices for a single event that he organised and then cancelled, one for £800 and another for £10,000. This happened shortly after a report which raised issues with enforcement of lockdown restrictions was released. Mr. James organised the balloon releasing event to commemorate the death of a friend, Jamie McKitten, by suicide. The plans violated COVID-19 restrictions on gatherings laid down by the government, and despite Mr. James's later cancellation, over 200 people attended the event. Mr. James paid the initial £800 fixed penalty, reduced to £400 for being paid early. Then, on the day of Jamie McKitten's funeral, the second, far larger fixed penalty notice was posted through his door. This occurred shortly after the 11th of April, the day of the event itself, and shortly before the publication of a report that highlighted certain errors in policing during the pandemic. The report, released by Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, released April 20th, overall praised officers for their policing during the pandemic. Nonetheless, it suggested that many officers struggled with the so-called 4E's approach, where officers are required to engage potential rule breakers, explain to them the restrictions and their necessity, encourage them to leave the area peacefully, before finally moving on to enforcement with fixed penalty notices. Durham Police warned against the balloon releasing event ahead of its scheduled date, but despite a police van being present on the day, eyewitnesses say officers did not attempt to engage with those attending. When approached for comment, Durham Police said the following. Officers issued the organiser of this event with a £10,000 fixed penalty notice, in line with government guidelines after it went ahead, despite our advice that it would breach COVID restrictions. Unfortunately, due to an administrative error by the National Police Unit, which manages SPNs on behalf of police forces, the incorrect penalty details were initially sent to the event organiser. Our approach throughout the pandemic has been to help the public follow the restrictions by engaging, explaining and encouraging, and only turning to enforcement as a last resort. ACRO, the Criminal Records Office in charge of issuing FPNs across England and Wales, said the following. We initially issued a fixed penalty notice incorrectly, using a different offence type. That amount was paid and has now been refunded. The correct fixed penalty notice, as reported by Durham Constabulary, has now been issued by ACRO. We sincerely apologise for this administrative error. Both organisations declined to answer further questions regarding the use of the 4E's procedure at Mr. James's event, or other concerns highlighted by the report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate. Mr. James could not be reached for comment, but will be fighting the charges in court.